Colorism is the practice of discrimination by which those with lighter skin are treated more favorably than those with darker skin. This can disadvantage both sides of the spectrum, although many people assume that colorism is only an issue for darker skinned people, but in fact, it negatively affects both ends of the spectrum through assumptions, stereotypes, and self internalized hate. Often, darker skinned people are called darkies, coons, and jigaboos, and lighter skinned people are referred to as red bone, light bright, and high yellow. Colorism is ingrained and deeply rooted in our everyday societies, but we don't even notice it because it has become such a normality. Ever wonder why everything that is good and pure is associated with the color white, and everything that is evil and dirty is associated with the color black? In the famous speech by President Robert Mugabe addresses the idea of the negative connotation of the color black, in his quote saying, "Racism will never end if we still wear white clothes to weddings and black clothes to funerals." Colorism affects how we perceive physical beauty standards and regarding race. In the world, it is prevalent that Eurocentric beauty standards are praised in society. There are even products created in an effort to make yourself look more Eurocentric, like perms, which are used in the African American community to make your hair that is kinky more manageable and straight. And also, there are skin bleaching creams that are stocked in South Africa and India called Oxy Bleach and Fair and Lovely. And there are even ways to use makeup to narrow your nose to make your nose look more thin. For some, it's easier to assimilate than others, but the real question is, where did this pressure to become more Eurocentric start?
Well, the idea of colorism was introduced in the early 1700s. A slave master from the Virgin Islands invited other slave owners to try to teach them how to properly control their slaves. This slave master taught others to make one group hate each other. They would do this by taking an African woman and breeding a lighter offspring that is different than the rest of the Africans. The lighter-skinned slaves were allowed to live closer to the house and were allowed other privileges that the darker-skinned slaves didn't have. For example, fair-skinned slaves were exposed to finer things. Some even traveled with their masters and thus were able to be more educated. According to hubpages.com, slave owners usually preferred light-skinned enslaved Africans for housework assignments because the light-skinned enslaved Africans looked more like the slave owner than the darker-skinned enslaved Africans who were perceived as more threatening. The reason for the difference in treatment was because slave owners seen the darker Africans as savages and something that you should be afraid of. Because of the shade of their skin, lighter Africans had more privileges than darker-skinned slaves because since the lighter-skinned slaves were closer to the color of white, they were considered of being more capable of being more educated and afforded with more luxury. After the turn of the 20th century, when slaves were presumably declared free, the idea of treating darker-skinned blacks discriminatory if you were a lighter skin tone lived on, thus skin color continued to divide blacks. An example of this was a paper bag test. If your skin color was lighter than a paper bag, then you would get more privileges than someone whose skin wasn't. This test was used in social institutions like African American sororities and fraternities, nightclubs, and even churches, often used to determine if one would be allowed into multiracial events. According to WatchDR.com, in 1928, Edward H. Taylor, a sophomore at Howard University, published an article in the student newspaper about different fraternities splitting different students by skin color, yellow, black, and brown. In the article, Taylor says, the light-skinned students were sought after by fraternities and sororities, particularly the latter, as members and dark ones passed by. The darker brown students then formed their own cliques, while the blacks are left out in the cold, showing that there was somewhat of a use of something similar to the paper bag method. There was still a divide between lighter and darker skinned people in the U.S. After this article was published, there was a well-argued response about the claim that was made about the article. It was similar sounding to us as if someone from today wrote it. And the author of this editorial edits the article stating, "There's nothing in white skin to gloat about, and nothing in black skin to be depressed about. It is character, intelligence, and virtue that count. Millions of morons, cretins, and degenerates have white skins and straight hair, while a long list of able Negroes from the kings of Ethiopia who once dominated the civilized world, to Askia of Shanghai, to Shaka the Zulu Napoleon, Mashe, the nation builder, Sir Apollo Kangwa, Prime Minister of Uganda, and to Roland Hayes and Nathaniel Dett have been dark as the night." So there was perspective that there was nothing special about being lighter in color, and you shouldn't think that color is your skin degrading or something to gloat about.
In the 90s sitcom show Martin, it tells the story of a group of friends who live in Detroit. Martin works for a radio news station and lives with his girlfriend Gina. And the show tells the daily encounters of Martin and Gina and their friends Pam, Tommy, and Cole, and also along with their other neighbors like Shanae and Brahman and many others who are just minor characters. But the show is quite stereotypical. Gina, who happens to be a lighter skinned woman, is portrayed as classy and she has a job and she has a partner. She's overall quite successful. Pam, who is a darker skinned woman, is always taking rude insults from Martin and uses insults to equate her to being ugly. Her character is always bitter and angry and she doesn't have a partner. Also, a character who I briefly mentioned earlier, her name is Shanae, and she's always wearing brightly colored weaves and nails, and which is equated to being ghetto, and she's portrayed as loud, aggressive, and angry, and she also doesn't have a partner, as Pam didn't. I myself used to think nothing of this. Growing up, it was just a show that we watched. But now I see how detrimental this can be to even kids as young as I was in stereotyping women of color.
Being a light-skinned person today in America, I'm exposed to many topics associating with skin tone in the media. There are many stereotypes against light skins. Like when texting someone, it takes a while to respond, or light skins think that you're better than people with darker skin, or just stuck up in general. I see how women and men are fetishized if they're lighter, and I even see pictures of kids who have lighter skin with the caption of saying, "Oh, I want my kid to look like that." It seems as if you have lighter skin that you're favored more, or you're more attractive or appealing. I think that my skin tone shouldn't be a reason why people may be seen as better or more attractive. No matter what color you are, every skin tone should be considered as beautiful.
From such a young age, many children are taught to hate their dark skin. Although I personally am not the darkest shade of brown, I even had self-hatred for myself growing up. Being a dark-skinned person growing up, you don't see any representation in the media of yourself, and if you do, it's most likely negative representation. And even your family may tease you for being dark, as I did, coming from a family with many light-skinned individuals. Growing up, I remember a step-grandmother from Puerto Rico. She was telling me about this mentality that they have in many Latin American communities called avanza la raza. And the idea about how you should not marry anyone darker than you or pursue anyone darker than you because then your kids will come out darker than you. And she basically was telling me that I should marry lighter than me and have kids with someone lighter than me so I can breed my children to be light so that they can be equated to being beautiful. And this is actually true in many people of color communities. People will specifically only marry or have kids with people lighter than them so that their kids will come out light. Growing up, I always wanted to be mixed or have loose curly hair because I saw that was praised, and I wanted to be praised for being beautiful or something. But many black people who are dark do have mixed ancestry, but they're often discredited because apparently you can only be mixed if you're light skinned. But also many black people trying to claim little percentages of Caucasian or indigenous blood that they have in them because being black just isn't enough for them. Having dark skin shouldn't be a bad thing, and it should be looked at with the same significance as having light skin.
What you should take from this is to look at all skin colors and seeing the beauty behind them, and to associate all skin colors and shades with beauty, including your own, and positive images in your mind of people of color in all shades.
You should acknowledge that colorism does exist in many people of color communities, and we should make an effort to stop it because it all starts with you. You should acknowledge that colorism exists in many people of color. You should. You should also. You should.
Okay, that was a fail. I'm not even gonna.
You should acknowledge that colorism does exist in people of color communities, and you should make an effort
to stop it.
You should acknowledge that colorism does exist.
I'm sorry. I can't.
That would be so funny. Okay. Oh, okay. You should acknowledge that